Budge!
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 Welcome to Budge, behavioural science in business, education and life. Today we're going to be talking about the impact of COVID on employment, calling this episode WTF WFH. And I'm with Dr. Darren Coppin, behavioural scientist, psychologist, writer, speaker, and of course inventor of the semicolon. How are you, sir?
Very good. Paul Miles, Managing Director of the Busy Group, one of Australia's largest training, education and employment organisations, and lover of dolphins.
I have an organisation now with about 1,000 people, and we have moved through COVID, to sustained periods of working from home, to probably a hybrid model in the long term. And you have this very controversial opinion that working from home isn't necessarily the best thing for humans and the best thing for business in the long run, despite the fact that someone like me is trying to use it as a major way to help make the company more efficient, more productive, and to help encourage longer term retention as a strategy to keep really good people within my organisation. I think employers around the world are doing a similar sort of thing and are viewing the hybrid model as a means of attracting and retaining great people. But you don't necessarily think this is a good thing, and you don't necessarily think this outcome of COVID, and of course COVID is, one of the biggest outcomes of course is the long-term use of work from home. You don't necessarily agree with that. So we're going to talk today about Graham Norton, what Graham Norton tells about work from home, and you also want to talk about something called OnlyFans, which I've never heard of, but I'm sure you can explain it to me.
I'll try.
So, working from home, so you're not necessarily convinced it's a good long-term solution for humans and for business?
No, when I've made a list of the pros and cons of this, I obviously assumed that working from home is great for everyone. It's great for the environment. You get to spend more time with your family. You're not using this or wasting this time commuting. So what are the downsides? But I think as I looked into it more, it became evident that there are some very profound downsides. How have you addressed it? What are you operating at the moment at Busy?
So we obviously, in Australia, we're filming this from Australia. We had those periods where it was, of course, mandated working from home, long periods, and the first one, back in the start of 2020 was quite challenging. Rapidly trying to get the technology, and then over the last 2 years, we've sort of returned to the office, come back out, and now as we finally, hopefully, fingers crossed, come out of COVID, we're going to be moving to more of a hybrid model, trying to enable those people that don't have to work in client-facing roles. To be able to come into the office some days, work from home some days. So to have that mixed model. And I see it as a benefit to both the company in terms of retention, but also to, I'm a single parent, so I'm a big fan of anything that encourages flexibility in the workforce to help, potentially attract people who wouldn't necessarily be able to get into the workforce.
Yeah, and from my initial research, and in particular with one work cover company, a huge organisation, they found that productivity went up with this working from home by as much as 28%. I mean, that's enormous. And also from studies, what people were surprised at is how good their employers were, particularly in the early days of the pandemic. And they weren't phoning up, hounding them. There were issues of, oh my God, my manager's phoning, he's going to have a go at me for still being in my pyjamas at 11:30, but I've been working. But 11:30 a.m. I hasten to add, and they were surprised that their managers are just phoning up to say how you're going, and so in terms of cultural scores in research, some studies from Denison Consulting found that culturally, initially during the first lockdowns and working from home, that companies became stronger. But in terms of core values, as time went on, it became weaker. And I think it came to the fore that these values and things that we have on our websites and that we're working towards are less and less authentic and relevant to what we're actually experiencing. But overall, people have been really impressed with the care and concern for well-being that companies have exhibited.
And it certainly was one of those things that we were very focused on. We wanted to make sure that people, by work from home, weren't sort of potentially impacted by somebody having the illness and getting ill. There was a genuine compassion. We did actually move though to lots of other processes and practices, I guess, where first the day started, everybody having a buzz call, we called, or a huddle, I heard it called in some other companies, where everyone calls in and then do that 2 or 3 times a day, so a check-in where people still have that collective collaboration thing, but I guess there's 2 points. There's that point, and there's one you've already made. Potentially where work from home doesn't work then is on the collaboration side of things, but also that well-being we're calling, because we are worried about that well-being of being isolated. So are they potentially 2 areas where work from home don't work? Is that work from home isn't necessarily good for your well-being, and it's not necessarily good. You talk about values is not good for collaboration. It's also not necessarily good for culture.
Yeah, there's first of all, from what I can tell from speaking to CEOs, there's a trust issue.
Yeah.
Are they working, really doing what they said they were? They were initially. Productivity seems to have gone up. Okay, that's there. But then,
so I'm going to jump in on. Do you know what the sad thing about that is, and this is where I get frustrated, is, you know what? Say there are a few people that aren't working that you can't trust. Is we've got to get to a position where we recognise that the vast majority of people can be trusted and they are doing the right thing. We tend to always respond as society, don't we, to the ones that are letting us, the people that let us down, and we make rules for them as opposed to making the rules for the 95, 99% who are actually doing really well. That's a complete side issue, mate.
Yeah, and that's that negativity bias.
Yes,
and that's just our safety response as an animal. We focus on the threats or the issues and just explode those things, and that's why if it bleeds, it leads, as a maxim for media.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's not them, the newspapers or websites, being mean and evil, wanting to promote all this negativity. It's that if they don't, their readership plummets.
Yeah, because it doesn't build into their biases.
Yeah. And our threats. But the other problem.
So we're talking about trust then. So for CEOs, business leaders, there's a trust issue with work from home.
Trust or suspicion that individuals aren't now part of that culture of your particular business. They're not interacting, they're not chatting, they're not as loyal, so they'll move on more quickly. There's possibly a drain on innovation, the infamous water cooler conversations. So there's more efficiency initially. In short and medium term, it's probably good for a business, but longer term, in terms of the direction of a business, longevity of employees, and a feeling of being together and supporting each other, that evaporates over time.
So this is when potentially something like hybrid or bringing people back into the office at certain periods works better than the work from home model. And I mean, and you've already pointed to Graham Norton in the past as being a good example of where things work better.
Yeah, I've been chatting. I've got a good friend that's heading up some wellbeing programs with people from the UN and Harvard and what have you, and they're trying to explore, can we deliver these online? Things online seem to work. Online consulting and counselling seems to work. Online meetings, but the bottom line is, notwithstanding studies which back this up, but you only have to watch Graham Norton when he was interviewing people on Zoom.
I won't do my impression of Graham Norton. I can't. I won't go near it.
Every time you do that, I think what are you saying to me? But yeah, it's. But it was awful. They're being blunt. It was just, there was no passion. It wasn't as funny. There was no engagement, and even putting people massively socially distanced in the same studio lifted it up 100%. And then people being really close to each other, so in as much as a verbal and visual, just looking at somebody's face, communication is huge for humans, probably more than any other species. But the other subconscious cues we get from people's body language and to improve engagement and bonding and trust of each other is lost when you're doing stuff online through Zoom or Teams.
Yeah, and this is why, you look at the growth of online conferences, for example. I'm not convinced this is sustainable, that you don't really go to conferences just to hear the speakers. You actually go to conferences to catch up with everyone else in your industry, look for the business opportunities, look for the partnerships, the collaborations, find out all the news and the gossip from the sector that, potentially you can then do something in your business to grow.
And who's the best karaoke singer at conferences? That's the most important thing.
It's key to everything.
But also the commuting to work. I used to take a couple of hours each way commuting into London and back out, and that's probably excessive. But it is a psychological break. It allows you to unwind or gear up for work.
I found this an interesting point, because I'd assumed, and a lot of the feedback I'm getting from my staff is the fact that they don't have to waste an hour, whatever, half an hour even coming to the office. They don't have to pay for parking. They don't have to pay for fuel. But what you're saying to me is that potentially that period between home and work is actually great psychologically, because you start to distance, you start to build on the way in. You start to think about work, so that by the time you're there, you're ready for it. And as you drive home, you're moving away from work, and you're starting to sort of move into your family life. Whereas if you don't have that, the differences between home and work become, so blurred that we never actually leave the office.
Yeah, and we are chattering monkeys, and no more so than when we're writing electronically. So there's this blur of when do I stop looking at emails, or is that email, is it actually a Facebook Messenger or a personal thing? What's coming up and popping up and giving me a dopamine rush because I've just got a ding on my phone?
Yeah.
But
God, that's a whole podcast on its own, isn't it? The behavioural science of dings on your phone.
the trouble is there's this blurred line, and the more emails you send, the more emails you get back. We will just keep going back and forth. That's why you think emails and the speed of communication will give us a lot more free time, but it's not. It's made us work more and more intensively, and it's had the opposite effect. So It's weird. So working from home, that delineation is blurred even further. It's non-existent, which isn't necessarily good psychologically. And there are areas, countries, and organisations, particularly governmental in Nordic countries, that are sort of blocking emails.
Yeah, France has done it.
Have they, France as well?
Yeah, email.
That's just sheer laziness, though, not behavioural science. No, I take that.
Because of a large French viewership following.
It's like a blur.
So the other thing, coming back to that period of when we were in lockdown and when we started to think this was fabulous, I know you're really keen to talk about OnlyFans, but before we do, we're also, the growth of certain type of social apps. So we talked about House Party, Uber Eats, which isn't necessarily a social app, OnlyFans, and of course TikTok. You were fascinated by the growth of certain types of apps during that 2-year period of being in and out of lockdown. Just talk me through that. Yeah, well,
clearly there are 4 categories of app that's just exploded in terms of use. Obviously, social and communication ones, WeChat, Telegram even, then health and government check-ins, health checks, registering your vaccines and what have you. But then entertainment, and this has been seen throughout history, from the Black Death to World War I and Spanish flu to World War II, is there's a boom in entertainment. Now, of course, our entertainment, we've been able to bring it in-house, but there's a boom in Disney Plus, Netflix, and a lot of other stuff. I think 10-cent video's gone massive. In India, you've got Takatak, which has gone massive. And then finally shopping and food online. Well, what's particularly fascinating behaviourally is in the first lockdown, there was just such an outpouring of socialisation, reaching out, helping neighbours, knocking, making sure they're okay. And that's when House Party just went massive. Everyone really engaged with that and made an effort to do so, and it was great. By the second one, it seems that apps more like Uber Eats were more popular. It's just, let's just get the food in and see if they're supplying toilet roll as well, that sort of thing. And then by the third one, it seems that things like OnlyFans was more popular, anecdotally, of course, but I've had to research quite extensively. But you can see during these different lockdowns, human responses have been different, massively social, massively just looking after the practicalities, and then just coping with being on your own or locked down or restricted. And we had 4th lockdown, and now we're living with it. But it's just interesting the way we've responded throughout these lockdowns in 2 years.
And of course, the other major one is Zoom, Teams, anything that involves that communication piece. But you're not necessarily seeing that as long-term sustainable. So I guess in summary, for CEOs like myself, although I don't know if I'm typical or not, I actually don't know, but I do like the notion of hybrid working. But what you're saying to me is be careful with that, and to make sure there's enough focus on culture, collaboration, and the delineation between work and home, so that we are looking after the well-being of people that work for us.
Yeah, and it's data as well. It's not just human emotional behavioural studies. When I worked with some large work cover insurers, people that say they've got a close friend at work come back to work much more quickly after an injury, psychological or physical, because they've got someone that's got their back and they've got friends there. That's the most important thing. Now, how do you nurture that as a business when they're working from home, and this isn't appropriate in this day and age, but the Friday night after work going down the pub,
which still happens in many companies,
was massive, and you've got to facilitate that in a more appropriate manner. But then people would communicate that they often wouldn't with their managers. I've got some issues, or the managers will say, you've got to buck up on these sort of things. It leads to a lot less bullying, harassment claims, suspicion, and worries. So how do we nurture that? And people think, great, actually we can do a load of online training, because it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot more efficient actually, and we can outreach to everyone, particularly in places like Australia with some remote areas. But the trouble is, you lose out on that bonding of staff. And also somebody said to me that how do you get promoted if your manager never sees you and you're not able to stand out and they can't trust you?
This is a key issue actually. It's something that's come up in studies from the US that what we're finding is that parents, and particularly mums, are using work from home a lot more. And also equity groups, people with disability, people of colour, they are working from home more than you and I, the middle-aged white bloke. And so we're getting back to cultures of middle-aged white blokes in office and middle-aged white blokes in getting the promotions. So it's actually potentially taken us backwards in terms of supporting equity groups, to be promoted and to be brought more into opportunities at work.
And let's not lose sight of the fact that this flexibility and working from home doesn't necessarily impact on productivity. Is a massive, huge global finding, a global study. But flexibility is great. People realising actually it's great being able to see my kids before they've gone to bed, or it's great being able to do this. So I think the flexibility or the acceleration of a 4-day week or whatever that's one of the silver linings of COVID. But it shouldn't all be working from home. A hybrid model where you really make an effort to encourage that human relationship interaction when people are together is the way to go for business.
And you've actually just answered what I was going to finish with, which is, what is the best way forward for businesses in terms of tackling work from home? Yeah,
it's that, I'd say 2 days on, 3 days off, or the other way round, or alternating. It's getting the best of both worlds, I think, but appreciating that there are big downsides to people working from home the whole time, and one of the key ones, that never being able to switch off. That's a big issue.
Big issue. Thanks, mate, as always. Another subject I know that we could talk a lot about. If you like what we're talking about, behavioural science in business, education and life, then by all means throw a nice thumbs up, or follow us, subscribe on YouTube or whichever podcast platform you're using. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.